Hello, everyone. I was still connecting. I believe we are live. Yes, awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. For those of us who attended our talks earlier, welcome back. I'm your co-host, Sam Bryce, along with Melissa Mendoza, and welcome to the Maintainers panel discussion. I'm really excited about this session. This is really a unique opportunity for both our maintainers and the audience to engage in a very special way. You may have already been introduced to our panelists earlier, but for those just joining us, please welcome our panelists. We have with us here Henry from, next slide. We have Henry from PyBind 11. Max Klein, I believe he was able to join us. Awesome, from Jupyter Lab. Thomas Caswell is coming in for, oh, wow.
Sam, are you sharing your screen?
I should be. Oh, I guess I'm not. All right, what's this? What's showing up? I'm curious. Oh, great, perfect. Right, Henry, who you met earlier, Max from Jupyter Lab. I thought Thomas was going to swap in for.
He's in the audience, apparently.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, that's great. If they both like to, we kind of have like an extra slot. So if you want to chime in at any point in time, he can just raise his hand and we can bring out for temporarily. So yeah, Max, Anna actually, and Carlos, as well as Colin and Predrag, and of course Niels, who some of you might have just heard recently from our maintainers talks. So in today's panel, right, so in today's panel, we'll be discussing a number of topics. I don't think we'll have time to actually cover everything. So what we'll try to do is at some point create a poll, and the audience can vote for the topics that they're most interested in, and then we can just kind of go from there. So to kick off this panel, the very first thing, how to get started in open source, I wanted to start with Colin. Make sure Colin is actually here. Awesome. Hi, Colin. I wanted to start with you because I ran into a talk that you did a few years back about how you got started in open source, and I thought it was a very interesting story that people would certainly relate to, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to share that. One of the things you shared was one of the very first code bases that you actually created on GitHub, and so what was fascinating to me was kind of like seeing your journey from learning Git, learning C++, to becoming like a maintainer in PyMC3, and to where you are today. So I guess, tell us a bit about, how exactly you went from, I don't know what this means, to adopting types in scientific projects.
Yeah, I think I hugely benefited from a really friendly community in PyMC3. I started off actually fixing the testing infrastructure for PyMC3 and just making a number of very small PRs. I sort of mentioned this during our talk, but the ability to get pull requests that were merged within minutes or hours was really beneficial. It made me feel really appreciated, and I thought, PyMC was a project I liked using, and it felt like such a rush to get things merged so quickly. Yeah, this repo is truly old, and I think I believe these were all grad students working on this, and I believe all of them are now working in software somewhere. So this is probably nearly 10 years old by now. And I'll also just mention the talk I gave was actually at a local high school, and one of the students in the course made a pull request to PyMC3 later that day, which remains my favorite pull request of all time because it was a high school student, and she corrected Chris Fonsbeck, who started PyMC3, on his use of the gerund. And it's the only time I've ever seen gerund used in a GitHub pull request. also to see it used correctly was quite a thing. So, anyways, the short answer is really quick merges was really helpful, and being able to start small and having the existence of small issues and quick fixes that could be merged was a really big thing.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. In a way, you've kind of answered the question, why contributing to open source is important. So I kind of like to pose that same question to the rest of the panel, specifically Niels, because I know you started Pandera about, I think, 2 years ago, which I believe makes you one of our youngest projects. And so I guess from like a person starting in open source now, what are the motivations that kind of drive you to create a project like this and go through the process of actually building up a community from scratch?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, as I mentioned in my talk, it started off as something that scratched my own itch, in the sense that I've been burned many, many times since I do like the convenience of pandas. Many times, like with datetime types and string, I expect something to be a float, but it turned out to be a string, or there was an object column, and most of it was floats, but then one of them, the values were a string, or was a string or something like that. So I just wanted a tool for myself to kind of outsource the correctness guarantees of a data frame, which is sort of like different. It has its own unique challenges. So I figured, there's like Great Expectations was around at that time also. There are a few other libraries around. But as a fairly opinionated pandas person, I was like, okay, I'll just try doing something, myself.
Yeah, cool. That's a very common theme, actually. People who effectively they're annoyed at enough with the current state of things that they're like, I'm just gonna actually change the world. Before you know it, you have like 1 million users, and you're speaking at SciPy. So it's really cool to see people still have that intrinsic motivation to just really start open source software. Out of curiosity, I guess Max, I wouldn't mind hearing your story as well, in terms of how you got into Jupyter, and what motivates you to contribute to open source.
So my advice would be to find something you hate, or really just like anything you're like super passionate about. But I guess for me, it was the auto-closing bracket feature in JupyterLab, which just drove me nuts. And there was, at the time, no way to like modify it at all. So that was my first contribution. And also my first thing I ever wrote in TypeScript. Kind of just snowballed from there. Although that isn't to say, so there were some attempted contributions to some other repos before that. So open source communities in general, I think, have like a very specific kind of etiquette, or like sort of mode of communication that maybe takes a while for people to kind of get indoctrinated into. So that's maybe like the hardest part, is just figuring out what to say to people in a repo where you're a stranger to get them to take you seriously.
So
having good code helps, but it's like not the only thing.
So you use the word attempted. Was it that like your code was no good, or you hadn't quite figured out the fiction yet?
I think I just picked a couple of repos with maintainers who were just very, very strongly intrinsically opinionated about kind of everything. I won't name any names.
Yeah, of course. Cool, awesome. Let's see what else. So yeah, everyone here has like very unique stories, and I honestly will wish we could actually just go through everyone's story. But and that kind of like, well, because we do have a lot of things to cover, and what we'll do is we'll kind of give everyone the opportunity to kind of share their stories as they hopefully participate in some of the other topics within this panel. But before we move on from the topic of getting started, there's a quick little game I wanted to see if I can play with everyone, going down memory lane to see if anyone or if people can remember what their first pull request was. So I actually ended up going through the GitHub history for like pretty much everyone in this panel to kind of like pin down where exactly they kind of like started in open source, specifically where they started contributing to like a project that's not their own. There's a few pretty interesting stories, pretty interesting things I noted, but I think there's a few important things I wanted to share with the audience, because it will well it'll kind of like enlighten you as to like what it takes to get started in open source. So the first thing I wanted to share was this pull request, and I've hidden who it was from largely because crap. All right, so it's actually showing. so this is a pull request to IPython, and it's something that Henry contributed. And this was like a while back, way before he actually became like I would say big time maintainer. And so the reason I wanted to show this is just kind of to show people there's kind of like a lot of cross pollination and collaboration throughout the entire ecosystem. And just because you don't necessarily have to be a maintainer to contribute to a project, and just because you're a small time contributor now doesn't mean like at some point in time you might not become a lot more involved in the project. So, and again, as you see here, this was kind of like a relatively minor thing. Like he didn't like change. Well, he didn't change the world. Like he didn't like create a brand new kernel or fix like some major bug. He just found something that was kind of annoying to him, and he sent a pull request, and people liked it and they merged it in pretty quickly. Now, I wanted to pose this question to Anna. So Anna, do you remember what your first pull request was into matplotlib?
I think the README, updating the README.
Yeah, actually, it was. I don't think it was a README, but it was actually documentation change. And yeah, this was again a very simple change. It goes to show like this is where most people start, and so if you're interested in getting started in a project, and the only things that you can actually work on are just doc fixes, don't be like disheartened by that, because honestly, that's probably the best place to start. And another question I have, well, I guess kind of for the audience, but it won't be too fast to set up this. But you have something to add, Anna?
Yeah, that this was specifically as part of the GSOC application process.
Gotcha.
Which is a point, like if you're starting out, like GSOC is a great place to start for contributing to projects.
Oh, right. Cool. Actually, this is this kind of makes my my next question a little bit harder to relate to. But it's basically I'm gonna set up a quick poll here to see how long it took for Anna, from making this first pull request to being added to the matplotlib GitHub organization.
Oh, Tom added me. Sorry.
Yeah, don't answer the question. I want to get like an idea from the audience how long it would actually take for someone to go from making a pull request to actually contributing to a project, over the course of a X period of time, and they actually get added to the GitHub organization. So it's either a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, or 2 years. I hope the poll is in. Oh yeah, publish. Sorry, I forgot to click publish. I think this is my first poll in AirMeet, so interesting.
I'd be surprised if the answer isn't after the third documentation fix, because honestly, if someone wants to help me write better docs for the stuff I maintain, I would make them a co-maintainer.
I mean, the matplotlib rule is a couple of significant PRs, or you like own a topic, and then basically it's in the future. Give or take.
Interesting. So we're seeing some pretty optimistic folks here.
I agree with Melissa, by the way. Like,
hold on, I haven't seen her answer yet. Hold on, what did she say? Wait, what did Melissa say?
Oh, so Melissa is the documentation as the ideal starting point is a little bit. There's some we've had this actually with GSOD, where like a user is in a great position to write some of the docs and not at all other parts of the doc. So, and like the matplotlib doc build system is insane. So like half the reason to start constructing the docs is just so you know how to install everything. So I think it's like if you're feeling overwhelmed by docs, that's okay too. Like just start with what you see needs fixing, whether that's docs or code.
Gotcha. Wow. So initially, at some point, the poll was kind of tilting towards like 1 month. And I thought that was kind of optimistic, and then now it's like dead even between 1 month and 3 months. And the answer is it took about 6 months, I believe, for Anna to be added to the Matplotlib. Well, added like anyways, as far as GitHub told me anyways, because she made her first contribution. This was back in, let's see, unless my math is terrible. This was in March, and she got added in September. That's roughly 6 months, right?
Yeah, but I thought it was earlier because I had labeling rights like as part of my gettings, as part of the community bonding period.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think you probably got like some privileges on the code base earlier. But I think, in terms of, I guess someone like realizing that you weren't part of the organization on GitHub and just actually adding you, that's pretty much how long it takes. It's kind of great to hear that you ended up getting a bit more responsibility in community earlier, because it's not just that, but like you got responsibility in community earlier, but it wasn't exactly completely visible, because some people, they might not see that kind of recognition for others within the community, and they're asking themselves like, is it the case that the maintainers are not appreciating these contributors, or is it the case that like they've actually given them access and we just don't know about it? But that kind of like, I would say recognition is one thing that I feel like a lot of projects are missing, and a lot of projects have actually done a really great job with, especially when it comes to giving props on like Twitter for people that have done like pull requests or new people on the team.
Yeah, I will say also this was an intentional move by Tom to get me to stick around. He was like, if I give her commit rights early, she might stay.
Exactly.
Not sure how he feels about that now, but
that's obviously worked out pretty well, right? Because he's still there, and giving people commit rights as a motivation to actually stay on. Well, not just that, but giving it to them early is again a thing that research has shown to work really well. Not just that, but like it also applies to letting a first timer's requests get merged in early, even if it's not like 100% perfect. If it's the case that it's like a nitpicking issue that can actually be resolved in a secondary like pull request, it's evidently anyways, it's easy. It's better to actually merge the pull request in, and then have them fix that like nitpicky issue. The reason is because it makes them a lot more confident that the changes and improvements that they make to the recently merged stuff is actually also going to get accepted fairly quickly. Because if it's the case that like everything that they try to merge in gets nitpicked, it bogs you down, and it does turn some people away. So let's see what next.
Yeah, we did a lot of work on reworking our process of accepting and reviewing PRs to try to do just that for the docs, because we found like especially our doc PR process was really like burning people out.
Got it. I want to get like a feedback from one more person in panel about like their experience, or at least their first few experiences sharing in open source. I don't think we've heard much from you, Predrag. So can you tell us like how you got started, and what your experience was like, contributing to open source projects?
Other than my own open source projects, I pretty much only started when I started working professionally. I was actually working with Colin at the same company at the time, and a lot of my first contributions were, I would find a bug, or I would, find some point of friction, and I would just open a pull request, hoping that the maintainer had the time to accept the patch and, learn that way. And this is definitely a little bit hit or miss. As maintainers, we have to put in a lot more work to make those kinds of interactions be as smooth as possible, even while, sometimes getting, negative feedback from users, or, other negative interactions ourselves. And I would actually love to hear more from Hannah about the thing that you mentioned about reworking the docs PR process, especially because I think that is something that is underappreciated, underrated in general, because encouraging people to make contributions is one thing, but encouraging people to contribute to documentation, especially in a productive way where they have all the support and mentoring from people that are in the know about the library, but also appreciating the fact that new people have a new perspective and might see things that are, broken for the fact that they're broken while everyone else is used to the brokenness. I would love to hear more about that if Hannah doesn't mind putting her in the spot a little bit.
I would love to hear more about that as well, because the documentation, sadly, people don't realize is it's the biggest complaint for people that are getting started in open source. I think it's like I personally think it's kind of like a catch-all complaint, but
the code is the documentation, right? That's the
yeah, but it is again. It's one thing to have it, to know that it's a big complaint. It's another thing to actually have like a way to address it. And it sounds like, Anna, that you pretty much worked on that pretty well. So we'd love to hear more about that.
I mean, I don't know that like it is not like any like great big anything here, right? Like just little stuff of like we implemented does it make the docs better rule, and then like that's the criteria if it goes in. Moderators can members can edit docs, so we're not doing typo checking as part of the review process. Like all those little things. I swear to God, I think the most useful thing is that CirclePI builds the docs and the artifacts, so like users don't have to do it locally. Though right now it takes 30 minutes, so I'm sorry about that. Like just like all of these little things that together start with reducing the friction points along the way, right? I forget, one of the projects was saying that they have it now where you can click on their page and start a doc PR. And that looks like the most amazing thing. Like if we could get that, because I think like that's another one of, right? Because most doc PRs are not great big. Here, I'm going to give you a whole big tutorial, right? I'm changing a couple of sentences at most. But it's still useful, right? It's less work. It's one less thing that on someone's to-do list, and it helps the project look more professional, polished. But yeah, so circling back, I think the big things are thinking about like, what is the thing you actually need? What is the actual criteria for approving the PR? Like, what is the thing you need from the new contributor versus what is the thing that is like nice to have?
Got it. Cool. So yeah, our next topic is broadly speaking about maintaining open source projects and specifically about like avoiding burnout. So Melissa's going to go ahead and like run this segment, and I'm going to dial down for a second, and if I'll chime in at any point in time if it's appropriate. But yeah, Melissa, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the topics that people were mentioning in the first session that they wanted to hear more about, which is like maintaining open source in general, how to avoid burnout, how to manage expectations, both for contributors and maintainers, and how do you get that juggling thing going instead of just dropping the project, which does happen pretty often. So I don't know if any of you has strong feelings on that and wants to start.
I'll go for it. I think this is a two-sided problem. Every one of us is a maintainer, but I think it's probably a safe assumption that every one of us is a user of many, many other upstream libraries. And I don't think any one-sided solution is really going to fix it. I think one thing that everyone here can do, not just the maintainers, is just be super nice to the maintainers, because they're doing all of this work and most of them are either unpaid or severely underpaid for the value that they're contributing to the community. And so just express your appreciation and say, I love the work that you've done. Maybe I found one, little bug here or an opportunity for improvement, but, just that positive attitude and appreciation, I think, goes really a long way. And on the other side, it feels really nice when people don't open with, your project is shit and I somehow have to use it, and, you should feel bad for having built it. It really makes a difference. And on the other side, I think we should normalize stepping away from a project and saying, sorry, I don't have the time and the energy to keep up with this right now. And, especially if it's a one-person project, I think it's very important to set those boundaries and respect them and just say, sorry, like, I understand it's buggy. You're welcome to open a pull request and I might get to it and I might not. And if you don't like it, then, if you'd like to be a co-maintainer, great. But otherwise, you kind of don't have a leg to stand on, I think.
Yeah, I really think the communication challenges also going through text only might be a challenge, because sometimes, not the complete meaning is conveyed just on text and through GitHub issues, and that may make up trouble for both users, contributors, and maintainers. Anyone else? Maybe Henry or Carlos, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I could say one thing that's also important to remember is to be nice to your other maintainers, especially when you're in a group of several. It can be very easy to sort of get into a mode where you just think, well, I'm trying to work on this, and you're slowing me down. You're telling me these things that I'm trying to get this done. This needs to go in, and you're asking to check these tiny boxes. But to just try to remember that other maintainers can cause burnout, within each other. I've seen this happen. It's not always just users, and I think it is very important for users as well. But honestly, a mad user doesn't affect me nearly as much as a mad maintainer does, co-maintainer, because you are going to get a few of the users who are just like, just not to use my own example, but to use somebody who was really unhappy that this Python 3.2 dropping was just happening all at once, and they were using pip 1.5.4 and Ubuntu 14, something that was tweeted about a couple days ago. But be considerate and think about the other maintainers too, because they're spending their time, and ultimately, the most important thing is that things get carefully checked and added, and that takes time. That takes a lot of your time to read over pull requests and make a decision on should this go in, because once it goes in, it's really hard to pull out.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And one of the things that I heard recently from a friend is that sometimes you suffer because you care so much. And that is absolutely true, I think, for many open source maintainers, because this is their life's passion or work or stuff that they really want to do, which is why they're taking time away from their families or their day job to do this. And this can be a source of conflict just because you care so much about that project and the people involved in it. Carlos, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I mean, I don't know. For example, especially when a project becomes popular, I mean, you get more requests for help, and they are spread in a lot of channels. So GitHub is one thing, but then you have Stack Overflow and Gitter, and sometimes people opens an issue and Stack Overflow person and also writes you a personal email, and they want an answer right away. So it's tricky to manage that, and you also want to help people because when you try to put on the shoes of users, then you see that they are suffering because, especially in Spider, we have UX issues or UI issues, and we try to provide a nice environment, but sometimes we don't understand how users are going to use it. So our solutions are not the best. So we have to probably do a big refactory behind the scenes just to make things work as users expect. And managing that for maintainers, I think it's really hard. It's not something that you can easily do, and sometimes you have to say no, or sometimes you have to say, we're going to do it in a future release, or we'll try to fix it in a future release, but months pass or years pass, and you feel overwhelmed due to the amount of requests. But still, it's nice to see that the tools that you're creating for users are useful. If they don't ask for help so much, then you also understand that the job that you're doing is perhaps not as useful as you would like.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to this is, I'm not sure if it's I think it's kind of tangentially related to burnout, but when, so for the Pandera project, I basically manage everything through GitHub. So I don't really have a Slack community or Discord. It's like kind of small enough for that to work. And I think like my point is to be open-minded to other people's ideas. And on the point of stepping back, it's not only stepping back from a project, but like stepping back to a feature proposal. And, you know, maybe you have like really strong opinions about the future of the project and you're like, no, I don't want to do this. But the whole Pydantic syntax for Pandera was this issue where I think my initial reaction was, it's already good enough, right? But taking into consideration that Pydantic is also popular, and like the aesthetics of the syntax eventually started looking good to me. And now I basically use that syntax almost exclusively. You know, your mind changes, and to take a step back from your initial reactions to something is super, I've found to be super important. It lets you kind of cool down if you have a strong negative reaction to something.
Yeah, so I want to give a chance for other people to speak to, but I just want to leave a provocation, which is, do you think there's strategies, like collective strategies, that we can think of and share between maintainers of different projects to deal with that burnout? Can we learn from each other? Can we learn from projects that have managed this successfully, or maintainers who have? I know a lot of people are mentioning Brad Cannon in the chat, and I think we've all seen his talks and blog posts, and I think that has helped me immensely, and I think sharing those strategies might be a good idea.
I really like what some of the things that he said, and I think it can help. And to realize that often if you're seeing somebody mad, you're just seeing, you know, the 0.1%, the 0.01%, just because you have so many, especially as a project gets larger, you know, some people are going to stand out. You know, there's a lot of bias there in what you see.
I think it's also worth coming back to something Hannah mentioned earlier about having really good tools helping. One of the reasons I was getting burnt out a while back was because I noticed that I would end up doing a lot of manual work, just making sure that, you know, pull requests were, you know, not degrading type hinting and things like that. And that's just one example. There are many other reasons why people might get, you know, fed up with a project and just not want to work. But and not all of those are solvable by better processor tooling, but some of them certainly are. And it feels like there's maybe not enough emphasis being placed on tweaking our development processes, the ways that we communicate with each other, you know, being cognizant of the shortcomings of, you know, text-based communication that's completely asynchronous and things like that. And it feels like it's an underdeveloped area, you know, and maybe there's more tooling that we could build and more processes that we could standardize around that would improve some of our outcomes. And obviously, this is not an end-all, be-all solution, but if this were a simple problem that had a, you know, one-size-fits-all, you know, solves everything kind of problem, we wouldn't be talking about it at this panel, right?
Can I add something to that? So as far as tooling goes, I don't know. There's definitely no like magic bullet that's going to fix all your problems and make it all the burnout go away. But one thing that I think really did help was like the moment we turned on not just like auto linting, but like auto fixing on commit in JupyterLab, which is something that I think more or less just because of like the one guy who develops Black and pre-commit in Python, it doesn't. He has a very strong opinion about it. So in Python, it doesn't happen that way, and you get this like whole mess where like your commits will get rejected, and like as long as you make sure that you're preserving like the AST, like the actual logical structure of your code. I don't know why we can't just do this automatically in Python. Like you have to do like some crazy hacks to make that work. And I think so like because JupyterLab's a hybrid JavaScript Python project, we just use like the what is it, like pre-staging or whatever the heck the JavaScript package is called that does this just automatically and easily. And I don't know why there isn't an equivalent in Python. It would make everyone's lives so much easier.
Well, just to go on to that, one of the things I think that's really helped us is that we've, in pretty much any project I touch, we almost immediately turn on pre-commit. So pre-commit's a tool from Anthony Slittle, And
this is what I'm talking about. So pre-commit alone won't do this unless you hack it.
so you turn on precommit.ci, and you use black, and you have a list of different things, and that really reduces sort of the amount of time you spend. I think most developers, certainly if you tend to be developing, you often tend to be very picky about style and various things like that. And certainly if you're maintaining a code base, you are. And
well, that's what I'm saying is you have to kind of let that go.
It.
That's how you counter at least some of the burnout. I think that, you know, just letting go of all that bike shedding, letting go of, you know, your personal opinion, maybe in favor of like the group consensus, is something that I don't know, at least personally I found that helped a lot.
I think having a standard, even if it's not perfect, is better than, you know, everybody having their own standard.
Yeah, no, so, like one standard per project.
Hannah, I think you wanted to...
Yeah, which is like, I find that the tools bit is easy. If we go to on a dev call and we're like, we want the new GitHub UI or forms or whatever, people will accept it, no problem. The hard part is, like Predrag said, and Medikin is pointing this out in the Q&A, is the process conversations. It's like, it's pulling teeth to get certain people involved in it, and like, it's the meanest thing you can do to some of our contributors is make them involved in these conversations, and some people see it, and some people who most need to hear it see it as a waste of time. And so, like, I don't know how you, and like what I find is if you are the person who's always bringing up the process conversations, people ignore you. So then you need to open other people to do it. And so like, so like the question is, right, like if we know this is kind of really important, like, do you guys have like something that's like worked? I feel like this is one of those things where you end up really needing to have, like, from the leadership down, like a really strong emphasis that we care about process and management and stuff, and we don't think it's a distraction from the code.
You know, one thing I think that's very, very important in any project is to immediately set up, and bring out on the table what is the sort of the power structure here. I mean, you have multiple people working together. Who makes final decisions, and how? So, you know, if there's basically a lead of the project, you know, they make the final decision. That usually works pretty well. And any final, you know, if there's a discussion, he can just say, "This is the way it's going to be," and then you just accept that. For group projects that don't have that, it's a bit harder, but you need to set something up, and it needs to be clear even from the beginning. Even a small project with just 2 people. I was on one with just 2 people, and unfortunately, both of us felt like we were going to be leading the project, and we both had final say, which doesn't work, and eventually that crashed. So it's really important to get that out and say, you know, this is how it works. You know, Pi-Bind11 has a more distributed structure now, so that, you know, you have to have a certain number of approvals on any PR, etc. from maintainers, but that should be written down somewhere or clarified very clearly from the beginning. Social side, I think that's really important.
So I think that is a perfect segue actually to our next topic, and I would say the next 2 topics, because I think they are very related, which are privilege and open source and building an open source community. So in terms of power structures that you were mentioning before, I believe a lot of people have mentioned this and have tried to understand the power dynamics that go inside open source projects and how that can influence how you build your community and how you bring new people into the project, if they stick around or don't, and how that affects diversity of people inside a project. So I just wanted to know if you have any strong opinions on that, and strategies that you have implemented on your projects that maybe you can share. And how do you see the question of privilege of free time in terms of volunteer work? Because we know that recently there has been a lot of talk about paying the maintainers, making sure they can make a living from their work, but that is not true for the majority of the projects. And so I was just wondering if you have any.
I'll say one interesting thing that PyMC3 did last summer.
Sorry, I think yeah, there are several problems there. I mean, since especially since at the beginning of the project you are too focused on the code and making it work and fixing bugs and stuff like that. You only value those kind of contributions, which I think is not that good. But as the project grows, then you start to value other kinds of contributions, more, the ones that are more directed towards users. But some projects can make past that point. And they focus only on the code, and then the rest is secondary to some point. And the progress structure sometimes also in open source projects sometimes also value only that, which is sad because, of course, I mean, the code is very important, but as someone said in the chat, I mean, people are really the ones that are using your project and the ones that are contributing back, either with suggestions, with other code, with documentation improvements or videos or stuff like that. So at least on Spider, we have tried to balance that by including different perspectives. And that's something that I read in a blog post, I think 6 months ago, which was about diverse groups. So the more diverse is the group, and especially not only, I mean, in different programming skills, but also in different perspectives, then your project is richer. And it's also, I mean, it's directed usually towards goal instead of just this constant race of fixing bugs and improving code. And in our case, at least, it has paid out, as you saw in my talk. We have had great contributions from Isabella, who is a designer working on Fancy. She has improved Spider a lot in ways that I thought we couldn't manage to do it because we didn't have the time nor the talents to do it. But we reached out to her, and she started to work with us. And I think, I mean, I'm more pleased to use Spider 5 than Spider 4 thanks to her. So it's something that it also, as Hannah said, is something that depends on the people that are more involved in the project.
Thank you, Carlos. Colin, I think you wanted to say.
Oh, I'm sorry for having interrupted you, Carlos. I was just going to mention that just on the subject of paying maintainers, and the PyMC has been working. We're one of the NumFocus supported projects, and so we get some amount of their donated money. We as a project do not have many costs, and so in the past we've used some of that money to fund extra students who we did not get money for through Google Summer of Code, but we were interested in having. And so I think that's particularly good in that there are sometimes students who are interested in contributing anyways, but sort of making sure that particularly as students, they're going to get paid was important to us as a project. I realize that itself is privilege, having sort of like a money in a bank account somewhere that we as a project can use, but it felt good to us as a community to be able to do something like that.
I think there's also a secondary thing, which is the privilege to mentor. Like, we have this problem with Matplotlib where, like, our strongest mentors and managers for the most part are it's because they're really experienced, which means they have their own students and employees. And, like, no, like, if you're doing that for your day job, I'm not sure you want to do it. That's volunteer work. So we basically end up with like one or two person, maybe like three, willing to mentor, and like they're good mentors in some ways, but then they end up overburdened, and there's only so many people you can take if you only have that one person, right? So I feel like lately one of the things that like just being able right, because we talk about like paid developers and stuff. Also, I think what Samana is doing with PyPA of like paid project managers is really interesting, because I think for some projects, like, right, you need people doing management, doing like a lot of the different jobs in the project that end up falling through or end up on the underprivileged person who thinks this is a priority. But the other thing though I'm thinking about in terms of hiring, right, is like both give projects money to hire people, but also give projects people, because like we know to just hire, to do the hiring for the CZI took like a month, even though we ended up hiring Elliot, who is an existing contributor, right? And like these are, right, this is time and resources the project doesn't have, and they have to figure out a process for that. And like, so I think there's also, right, like figuring out what the projects specifically want in terms of resources too, which but yeah, like Melissa, I have found that the easiest way to specify the project is pay people because of free time.
For mentoring in particular, I'm curious what folks here think about sort of asking people that are being mentored by a project to sort of pay it forward and mentor someone else, you know, in the near future, let's say. Is that something that might work? I haven't seen it deployed in many places, and I'm wondering if there's something sort of fundamentally broken with it, or if it's just sort of not been tried yet.
So I just wanted to say from David Nicholson in the audience, he said, could speakers say more about what projects can do to make sure we are not just getting contributions from people with privilege to be able to contribute? How do you reach out? Do you have anything to say about that? Because that's part of community building, but that's also part of how to build your maintainer pool and how to, you know, engage people enough so that they stick around. Because having drive-by contributions is one thing, but having people stick around and actually take part in your project.
I think I can maybe say something about this, because I think Jupyter Lab, at least not historically, but recently, has been fairly successful at recruiting a more diverse cast of core contributors. We talked about this endlessly at a developer meeting a couple of years ago, how it was like 10 guys, 10 or nine white guys and one, you know, still a guy sitting in a room, you know, talking about the future of Jupyter Lab, you know, the exclusion of whatever other possible contributors there were. And I kind of want to call out the contribution of one person on the team in particular, Stephen Sylvester, who I think has just sort of mastered the art of like when to give out elevated privileges to people. Like, I don't know, I think there's sort of like an art to reeling in like a new contributor. You know, you see somebody become interested, like start contributing, start making actual like either just like, you know, a history of like good issues or like a series of good PRs. And it doesn't matter whether they've been necessarily contributing for like a month or for like, you know, several years. Like when they show that kind of level of involvement, that's when you should kind of positively reach out with like some kind of, you know, reinforcement. And the horror story of the person in chat where they had to wait like 2.5 years, you know, of scut work to get elevated privileges, that just sounds like the exact opposite of what anyone should be doing, because that's not how you get or maintain like a good cast of contributors, you know?
I like one of the things we've been doing is the Matplotlib dev calls are technically open to everybody, but people don't know that. So what we've been, so I think like the thing that's been like effective is when people have like 1 or 2 really big PRs, is like just ask them, hey, come to the call, like come and participate, right? It's a way for them to interact with the community more, to like feel like the contributors really care, get feedback. Because I think like if you're putting just the PR, I think sometimes it can feel like it's just in the wind. You know what I mean? So that seems to have been effective in sort of keeping people coming back too.
So yeah, on that, I just wanted to bring up, yes, Brigitte's point on the chat, which is about gatekeeping and how that impacts your community. So that's the opposite of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about how to efficiently onboard people so that they stick around and become part of your project, as opposed to gatekeeping and maybe holding people back from doing meaningful contributions. How do you deal with that? And I think it's all connected. So I would also mention mentor burnout, which is what Hannah was talking about earlier, about having only a few people be mentors and then having to deal with all the inflow of new contributors. Do you have any?
Like, I feel like some people like they feel like they have to be a mentor because the project needs to show that they're mentoring. But it's just, yeah, like, you know, like everyone's like it's the total trope of, you know, put on your air mask first. But it's true, right? Like if you're burned through, you're gonna, even if you don't intend to, right? People are leaky abstractions. If you're burned through, that leaks on your other people, on mentees, you know, whoever. So like it's okay for the project to not, like, Matplotlib does not participate in Outreachy because we do not have the people to properly do Outreachy.
So that's also part of the boundaries we were talking about before, right? Realizing when you don't have the resources and the energy to do a couple.
Right. The worst thing you want to do really at the end of the day is have somebody from diverse backgrounds have a terrible experience with your project.
I also think that when you do manage to attract someone from a non-traditional background to your project, you know, this doesn't happen very often, and so you should take it as a learning opportunity to figure out, you know, why it doesn't happen more often and what you can do to make the process smoother. You know, really understand the background and the, you know, difficulties that person has faced, because it's probably quite different from yours. I can at least speak about one facet of this because I'm, you know, English is my second language, and I'm not, you know, I'm not American. I'm a foreigner. I'm you know, from North Macedonia, and so a lot of the people that I went to, you know, school with are extremely competent, but they have a fairly thick accent, and maybe their English isn't, you know, isn't the best. And that means that they don't really get the attention that they really deserve in a lot of projects, just because, you know, in written form, they make the occasional, you know, vocabulary or grammar mistake. In spoken form, they have like a moderately thick accent. And so they end up being, you know, discriminated against in various ways. And I mean, this has been great for me and for my team, because we've ended up hiring a lot of these people, you know, and like I ended up working with a lot of really competent people. But it feels like, you know, every time you found someone that is not, you know, not particularly similar to anyone that you already work with, that is a learning opportunity, and there's probably a massive untapped opportunity there for you and for your project, and maybe even your company as a whole, to figure out how it can do better and how it can attract more people like that. And I think that's really the only way that, you know, all of this can happen sort of sustainably in the long run. I don't think, you know, I, as a, you know, white man from one particular corner of the world, know anything about attracting people, you know, who are not, you know, from my background, from the opposite side of the world, with a very different, you know, cultural experience and you know, upbringing and background and education and everything.
That's a great point. And I think it's something that I can feel it deeply as well, being a Brazilian and also speaking English as a second language and having trouble sometimes conveying what I want to say. But
I have a question about diversity. What is everyone's academic background on the call?
I'm coming from the biology and public health world, so kind of pivoted into
grad, master's, or PhD?
master's of.
I am Dr. Max Klein of biophysics, or computational biophysics. Yeah. So I don't know. Right after I got my PhD, like I went around putting Dr. Max Klein on all, like, you know, whatever forms I had to fill out. I don't know. It's not that classy.
Yeah, PhD in computational physics.
I'm a doctor of math.
I have a bachelor in computer science.
I have a master's in physics.
Yeah, I have a
So like,
PhD.
sorry. So yeah, like it's interesting how in the open source world, like 3/4 of the people do not have a CS background.
Yeah, I'm doing a PhD in CS, but the other point I want to make, right, is everyone here has at least a bachelor's in a STEM field, mostly with a physics background. Like in MapLab, I'm the odd person out, but I have an engineering degree. And because when we talk about diversity and we talk about underrepresented groups, we also have to factor in the intersectionality of like where everyone has the same academic background, we're picking from limited pools, like who is even in there, right? Like this is what I find with my students. I try to get them into GSOC, but they all have really good internship opportunities because they are, you know, very small pool that is being attractive to folks. And I don't like some of this is part of the gatekeeping Brigitte is talking about, where we bake in these like all of this culture around academia. I think academia and all those norms are like just baked in ways that I think are blind to people who haven't felt friction with those norms. And I think like that, right? So if we're also thinking about diversity, I think we both have to think about like what are the expectations we have of our users coming from kind of the backgrounds of all our contributors.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Go ahead.
Hannah, would it be rude if I asked, you know, kind of like what the specifics of that friction are that you see?
I mean, for me, I think a lot of people have pointed out is like the review process, right? Like a PR review process looks a lot like if you're trying to get an academic paper, and like how all your contributors will like everything is reviewer too, right? Like that is how a PR process works. So if you're not used to that, it
can feel like somebody shoved a broom where they shouldn't have. Yeah, I mean, the way you have to take that is like, well, that person took the time to like go through my code and come up with, you know, criticism, constructive or not, and you know, it's some value in there somewhere that you can extract. But yeah, no, it takes time to build that thick skin to deal with that for sure.
Right. Like a thing I think about a lot, right, is just the whole knowing that you can contribute, right? And like this is, I'm thinking a little bit about like lab culture, right? Like, because I get into this all the time. Where in a lab, you're supposed to like there are projects floating around, you're supposed to just pick it up and do it. But if you're not used to like that is your expectation of work, if you're coming from a discipline or something, or if you're not like academic, right? Like if you're like an undergrad and like your projects are assigned to you, the idea of just going and finding something is, but that feels insubordinate, right? Like that is the thing, right? Because you very well maybe like if you've dealt with managers or someone else who like will tell you that's insubordinate, right? Like the idea of just going to a project and being like, you're wrong and here's my fix is insane.
Isn't that kind of like the hardest thing for at least most graduate students to learn though? Like the first 2 or 3 years is how to be independent like that. Like that's not something I think people come for usually. You know, they don't come with that, right?
Yeah, but see, that's the point. We teach into grad school students, and those same values are why they're a lot of the project contributors. But if
sure, sorry.
But if you're looking at like diversity, but again, this goes back to like diversity, right? Like if you're looking at like U.S. STEM diversity numbers, and you're also like, how do we diversify our contributor base while expecting our new contributors to behave like graduate students who are not a diverse bunch?
I mean, to some extent, I think there's like a pragmatic reason for that. They're like Matplotlib is maybe like a good example of this, where you guys don't have, you know, like a project manager in the community or like somebody who could organize that work. Really, like you kind of have to be all independent operators because that's like the model on which you operate, right?
Absolutely, right. But again, we're like, how do we increase diversity without? I feel like we sometimes are like, how do we increase diversity without really interrogating why we're not diverse in the first place?
I mean, part of the reason why Jupyter Lab suddenly got more diverse was because Quantsite took an interest in funding various of our activities, and provided somebody who acts as a project manager and draws other people in. And
yeah, right.
I don't know. I guess all I'm saying is I don't have a better idea. Sorry.
No, I think that, I mean, I think even just acknowledging, oh, you need a manager is, a first step.
I mean, it certainly helps to have somebody, anybody sort of organizing the herd of cats, who are, doing their own thing.
Yeah, we have a contributor who's kind of doing that now because I think he got fed up with us not.
So you need passion, right?
So on that note, I think it is time for us to go to the next subject. And I'm so sorry to cut off such a wonderful conversation. And I would certainly be open to hearing more from you either on Twitter or on Slack. So just as a reminder, we do have a Maintainers Track Slack channel on the SciPy Slack. So if you want to join, maybe we can continue the conversation there later. But I just wanted to give a chance for Sam to come back with his topics and the stuff that he has planned to talk about. Sam, are you there?
Hey, can you see me? Sweet. I took a second for me to unhide. But yeah, thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I could kind of sense the kind of the tension and difficulty in discussing some of these topics. They are really hard things to talk about, and honestly, why this this session is special is it's better to talk about these things live, but unfortunately most of the time our communications are asynchronous over text, and as you know, I think the dimension that text gives us to communicate is not ideal. So let me see if I can lighten up the mood a little bit before I move to the next session. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Great. So yeah, since we're on the subject of community, I wanted to play a little game that I totally stole from someone. I'm not going to tell you who, but you have to look it up later. It's a game called Defend Your Tweet. So basically, I took the opportunity to go through some of these maintainers' Twitter feeds, just kind of get an idea of what kind of stuff they post, and pulled out some of the more interesting things. And now we're going to bring them up and ask our panelists to tell us what they were thinking at the time.
I have never been more glad that I don't use Twitter.
I feel like I've already said everything.
Oh yeah, this is I guess we'll see. So Anna, we'll go ahead and start with you. On May 23rd, you tweeted, "I sometimes feel deeply confused by how I end up in some people's blockchains." So I guess my question for you is, how exactly did you hide Colonial Pipelines, and did the FBI buy your story?
What did I do now?
How did you hack Colonial Pipelines, and did the FBI buy your story?
I just paid someone to do it. Sorry, it's easier.
I'm out of curiosity though, how do you actually find out that you end up in someone's blockchain? Because I barely use the technology, so I'm kind of curious to know how it's kind of common nowadays.
I'm literally blocked by people who I never interacted with, at all. And I know my account is generally innocuous when I'm not complaining about people.
Is story 645 pretty much your handle everywhere? And
yes.
I have no idea what that means. Could you tell us a bit more about the backstory?
I'm one of those idiots who never changed my name from middle school. That's the time I used to wake up. I decided, I guess, in the interest of radical transparency, I was I'm going to keep this name everywhere. So this is GitHub, it's LiveJournal, it's Kindred, it's sites it's Harry Potter forums on the internet. So literally, if you really want to deep dive on the fact that I'm the same person on the internet for 20 years, wow, have fun.
All right. Well, I'll keep that in mind for our next session. So next up we have Niels. So Niels, this was a fun tweet that I saw from you. Very meta problem. So on August 3rd of 2013, you tweeted, "You wish there was a text summarization program to summarize a text about text summarization." The question that came to mind was like, why were you tweeting while attending Woodstock?
Attending what?
Woodstock.
Oh, Woodstock. Yeah, it's hard for me to remember exactly what I was doing here, but I think I was working on a project in grad school that tried to summarize public health articles. But I don't know what rabbit hole I'd fallen into to cause me to tweet this thing.
Okay. That's a good enough explanation for me. So next up, actually, this is kind of my favorite. This is from Colin. So Colin, I went back on your feed and I saw this tweet from back in August 2016, where you talked about when life gives you 276 unresponsive warnings, get a bigger hammer. And my favorite part of this is where you also mentioned you added built the cutting edge content filter using TensorFlow to my resume. Now, more recently, you also tweeted this. Oh, sorry. You tweeted this, so I'm kind of wondering what the connection is between those two.
I think Colin left the stage.
Oh, he did. All right. Well, anyways, I really would like to see if he actually put that on his resume. But anyways, so that was basically just a quick tidbit to introduce you guys to the fact that a lot of these projects are very active on Twitter. And specifically, a lot of our maintainers are very active on Twitter. And I'm going to go ahead and post their Twitter handles into the chat box and also into our Slack. Be sure to follow them on Twitter. Specifically, also follow their projects because it's a great way to kind of like get involved with the projects. Keep in touch with the maintainers, and you, of course, you get the updates the natural way that you normally get updates, assuming you use social media very much.
Yes, no, I like that. GitHub is my social media.
What is it? Oh, it is? Okay, awesome.
Well, I mean, that's the link you listed for me. So.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah. It seems like the last thing I tried to paste didn't quite go on and puts it in. This was Cosmic Glory. That is Neil's Twitter handle. Cool. So yeah, our next topic, open source is paid work, is actually something our keynote spoke about earlier. I guess there's one thing to talk about open source as paid work, and it's also another thing to talk about like money in open source, right? If you want to talk specifically about money in open source, there's things such as the CZI grant. You have kind of organizations such as NTOT that basically will hire these professional developers and embed them within these projects to kind of like guide them in a lot of ways toward the direction that I guess you could say big business thinks these projects should go. So I guess my question to start off with, oh gosh, Max is out. It was going to be for Max, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it to Carlos because you are in kind of this situation where you're working for an organization that is a major backer of your open source project, and that kind of gives a different feel to the project in a lot of ways. And so, how do you think open source's paid work has changed over the years, and how is it like impacting the way that you run your project?
Well, basically. It makes it maintainable. I mean, before I had a team, it was practically a solo project for me. I mean, I started working in SpiDer in 2010. Then I became the maintainer in 2013, but only on 2015 I was hired by Anaconda, and not to work on SpiDer. I worked mostly building packages for the Anaconda team. And part of my time was dedicated to SpiDer, but then I after asking Travis and Peter, the current CEO, a lot for funding, then they gave us some funding to hire 3 developers, and that was really nice because we could, as a team, we could do way more things and also do more long-term planning. And for example, now we were able to create this API to extend the SpiDer. Those kind of things have not been possible if I was the only person or mainly the one person maintaining the project. Because I mean, just trying to fix bugs and give support is practically a full-time job. So I think it's really necessary for open source projects to have some kind of sustainable funding, because otherwise, I mean, it leads directly to burnout. I think it's really impossible to keep that out of the picture, unless, of course, you want to, for your project to not grow so much. I mean, you can reach a point and say, I can handle more. I will leave it as it is. I won't provide more features, or I won't give users this and that, and that's it. But also with the team, thanks now to QuantSight, the project is now progressing more rapidly. We have access, for example, as I mentioned several times, to designers and people with other backgrounds that can help the project grow in other directions that I also haven't contemplated before, and that makes also a more inclusive environment to work, and also makes it more sustainable, really. Otherwise, it's I don't know, it's really hard job, and I can say it by experience because I was a volunteer for 5 years.
I guess out of curiosity, so you're kind of talking about, like, it's the ideal experience, like a pretty nice experience that you have right now, or at least like pretty nice position that you're currently in. I guess I don't know your full history as far as other projects that you'd managed. Can you tell us, like, some difficulties you had in some previous projects that weren't quite well funded, and how you went about, like, addressing those, like, difficulties?
Well, I have only contributed to Spider. I mean, as a maintainer. Of course, I have contributed to other projects when trying to fix bugs. But in my experience, well, I really like the project. I was a user for a year before starting making contributions, and I wanted to improve certain things at the beginning. Then I wanted to help Pierre, the Spider author, with managing issues in the issue tracker. Then progressively, he started to get more busy in his work, so I tried to fill in his role, and finally I became the maintainer. But what I tried to do is, I mean, at some point I had to decide if I wanted to make open source my job, or at least a career plan, or if I had to switch to something else. So for that, I presented a talk proposal for SciPy 2013, and at that time it was the first time, I think, that they opened a financial aid for people that couldn't go to the conference due to, I mean, financial issues, and they accepted me, and that's when I met Travis Oliphant, QuantSight CEO. And yeah, at the beginning, I tried to get some funding for the project, and that, I mean, for several reasons, especially because probably they haven't hired someone or have contact with someone in Latin America, they couldn't send me that sponsorship. So I mean, I went back and forth for over a year with that. And at the end of 2014, he offered me to work for Anaconda.
That's you actually brought up an interesting point, actually, which I'll circle back after I touch with a few of the other panelists, and that's how the experience has been for you, someone who's outside of the United States. I mean, Predrag talked about the fact that, there's like a lot of people that get discriminated against because of, their accent or whatever. But yeah, I'm kind of curious. I wish I could see in the audience, what the distribution is as far as people, where they're located. I mean, I'm sure the majority of them in the United States, but I know for a fact that, especially within the well, I was going to say machine learning community, there's a pretty strong cluster in, Europe, Western Europe, for SciPy, etc., and Keras as well. But yeah, so I guess staying on the same topic, open source or money in open source for like I'd like to ask this specifically to Niels and Henry to some extent, for your newer projects that don't have as much I guess you could say industry footprint. I've seen a lot of attempts, I hate to say attempts, but initiatives by places like GitHub where they make it very easy for you to like sponsor a project or become a backer. There's also things such as Pratheon that actually just make it easy for very regular folks to contribute very small amounts of money, which at some point ends up being a big deal. Like has that really changed the environment for you? And are there any ways that you're being able to utilize that to maximize, I guess you could say, the contributions or the financial contributions that people are willing to give you? And you can go, Niels. And you can go, Henry.
Yeah, on the topic of sort of international users internationally, I do track on Google Analytics like what the distribution is of people who use Pandera around the world, and it's not nothing. There, I think of the 150 odd people who use Pandera every day, like I haven't crunched the numbers in a while, but at least 20 or 30% of them are not in the US. So
is that data coming from like download monitoring, or is that actual telemetry?
No, this is just Google Docs visitors.
Okay.
Or not Google Docs, sorry. The Pandera documentation, read the docs visitors. So I think that's a better proxy than downloads, since most of the downloads are just CI, I think. So that's what I track more closely. In terms of funding, I was like super happy when I got my first. Pandera has 2 sponsors right now, and every time it's just like, yes. But it's like, so I have a day job. I'm not sure. I don't have super high capacity to like do anything from like community building to all the other things that make a project holistically work. So I mean, I'd love help on that front, but so far my life is basically like flight kit, Pandera, and then of course first is like family and like friends. So that's about as much capacity I have these days. So I mean, I think Pandera is at the stage where I do want to look into like things like num focus, or ways of avenues of support that are not build your own company, basically.
Right. Gotcha.
With SaaS.
Yeah. How about you, Henry?
So for me personally, the structure is a little different, just because I'm part of IRIS-HEP, which is an Institute for High Energy Physics software, and they directly pay me, and as long as I work on things that support sort of the software stack that we're building, that's time I can spend and I can work on that as part of my job. And then for the individual projects, usually that's been enough. Pipeline 11 has had support from Google as well. We have one Google engineer who's working on it, as well as they supported our CI, which is why we can run 70 jobs or 120 jobs all in parallel, which is really nice. But still, even the 10 is really, really nice that GitHub provides. I've looked into it, so like I have some of my own projects that would be nice to, I work on the side off and on, and it would be nice to have some sort of funding to help those. But I've looked at it a little bit, but I haven't actually used it anywhere.
Gotcha. I have a question from the audience here for Carlos. And the question is, does the continued funding that you get, this is from Martin Yao, and the question is, does the continued funding that you get come with any expectation about what you should be working on in terms of any things on the roadmap?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So to finish Spider 4, we received sponsorship from 2 companies. One was Kite, which wanted us to add a code completion client for their service. So we basically were hired to do that. And the other ones were from TDK Micronas, which is a German company that is producing microchips for medical equipment. And at the beginning, they funded us just to make the project viable. And then for Spider 5, they wanted us to make this new API because they wanted to extend Spider with their own plugins for their own projects. So yeah, those are from that side, but also, the team that it's part of Quansight, most of the team at Quansight work in other projects. So, with clients. So that money helps us also to pay the salary of the entire team. So gotcha. It's something that at Quansight we don't have many strings to touch, but for the contracts that we have with companies, we do.
Got it. Cool. So yeah, I guess along the same kind of topic, I wanted to ask. Get Max's input on this because I know Jupyter is a giant of a project, and there's like a lot of commercial interest in it. And
yeah, there's actually I have been shocked at how much people are willing to put money into that project. Essentially, like it started for me as like a hobby that then became a job. So Jupyter, at least Jupyter Lab, has sort of a weird funding structure in which the majority of the core contributors are paid by one giant corporation or another, and all of us have some, either for the most part, it's sort of like a handshake, gray area kind of thing where we're all given like some portion of our work time to do, open source work, work on the maintaining like the larger projects. So it's from my perspective, it's kind of like a like a carve out. Like essentially, my employer has an interest in Jupyter Lab and interest in like certain features that they want implemented, and so that's what I spend roughly half my time on. And the other half of my time I spend just working on general open source projects and maintaining core Jupyter Lab. The thing is, like, I wish that model could work for more projects, like for example, Matplotlib, but I think maybe like Plotly ended up eating their lunch. But,
yeah. Well, I guess the one question I do have to follow.
I don't know how. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is I don't know how applicable it is to like the broader open source world.
Well, yeah, Jupyter is special in a lot of ways, and I definitely it's really hard to apply the opportunity that Jupyter gets to other projects. But the one thing that kind of surprised me when you were speaking earlier about your experience in Jupyter was the fact that there was a lot less traction than you expected in terms of making progress towards specific goals in Jupyter Lab. And so it sounds to me like despite all the money that was getting poured in, there's something else that was making it like difficult to either like just drive forward, or things just ended up being like much more complicated, or maybe scope creep like happened.
It depends on what. So some things like accessibility just turn out to be something that needs to be plumbed, kind of from the top to the bottom of the project. It's just the project's already several 100,000 lines of code, so that just naturally ends up being difficult. And the other thing is, what are these companies that are paying all the core contributors actually interested in? The features that they're interested in, the features that the contributors are interested in. It's happy when they overlap, but that's not always the case. And so sometimes things end up getting prioritized that aren't necessarily the most, Ideally, we all work very hard to make sure that in the end, what we spend the majority of our time doing is good for the project. Like that's sort of the goal. But like some specifics do end up getting, I guess, left behind.
Are you saying,
for example, accessibility? There's zero interest in anyone actually funding that work, which is why we ended up going for the Chan Zuckerberg grant.
Interesting. Okay. So Anna, you also went with CZI, and then to some extent, you've been on Matplotlib for a while, so you probably know a lot about the funding stories and how things are going, and how things could be improved. So could you share with us like your experience with Matplotlib and like people that get paid to work in your project?
Yeah, and I actually want to tie into what Melissa said about like folks in free time, because I was paid as a GSOC student. I was paid as part of the John Hunter, and now I'm paid under the CCI. So like a good chunk of my Matplotlib work has been paid in one way or another. And I mean, I've been in grad school for about 3,000 years because I was like, my advisor didn't have a research funding. Also, don't go to grad school if you don't have a dissertation topic. But so I was teaching for like 6 years, and then fellowship stuff. And the thing is like, because you just like, I mean, I'll scope that. Like he was saying, CCI will pay for accessibility. CCI also paying for like a theoretical re-architecture rooted in topology. Like that's not a thing that's easy to shop to funding agencies. It's a CS visualization theory project where the applications are there, but if you started it with the applications first, you would end up with a really you wouldn't be doing the math right. So like the fact that like CCI will pay for these things that nobody else will is why they've been so attractive. Like that's why we all put in grants for them. And yeah, it means like I can do my dissertation because there's no way I could do this on free time. It's not, God knows. And I mean, but also, like, we also get to fund Elliot, who's at full time, and he gets to do, and he's running around doing maintenance and like stuff like DCI. Like he has a PR now to do a little bit of accessibility work, and like various things. And it's funding Tom to do some managerial stuff.
So how much of your team would you say is actually getting paid to work on the project?
It's still a minority. It's the three of us. And we applied for a small dev grant to hire the quant staff folks to do something, but
and your team is like your core team, would you say how big it is?
10 to 12 people.
10 to 12 people. Is it the case that you're only aware of the three of you guys getting paid, or is it possible that the others on the team are actually getting indirectly paid by their employers?
Tom has the numbers. The only other one who I think maybe sometimes has like 10% time is Ryan May at UCAR, but everyone else is, I don't know. I mean, some of our people, they're professors, and like this is not, or they're postdocs. So there's one other person who may be, but I don't think so.
Gotcha. Okay. So, I mean, I guess we're going to keep going along that same vein as far as open source is something else. Specifically, we're going to touch on open source in academia. I know, Henry, you are literally in academia, yet somehow you've managed to be a maintainer for like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, seems like 8, 10, maybe 10 major projects. I guess I'm curious, I mean, when I graduated school, open source was not a big thing. GitHub was definitely not around, and so the idea of open source being part of your coursework was foreign to all of us. And I am curious to learn, your experience over the years being in academia, how you've seen open source kind of like change academia. Where you think it's going in the future? What are some things that you think could be improved between open source community and academic community?
Yeah. So early on, so when I started, I guess back in 2006, 2008 or so, it was certainly Python wasn't the sort of the standard thing. A lot was MATLAB. Sort of the work I was initially doing was in MATLAB. And one of the things I started doing was trying to move over the analysis stack we were using over to Python, and it let us do things like just put all of the analysis right on the machine we were collecting data on. And so we were getting our research was easier to do because we didn't have to get it back to a machine that had a MATLAB license on it, and that was fairly transformative at the time. And then from then on, in different areas. I think just having that sort of the access and the fact that you could work on it. I have a tendency to start working on the back end of whatever I tend to touch. So and that's sort of become my role in IRSHEP, that I got interested in packaging and various other things that aren't always things that people enjoy doing, but are really important for all the stuff that we're doing in the back end. And the fact that you can just go in and fix and help and work on the back end, make sure things worked properly, was really big for us. And I think in my area in high energy physics that we've had a fairly strong open source component for a long time. We like to try to have as much of our research open as possible. We like to have our papers as open as possible. And we've always been fairly strong into open source, but traditionally maybe a little bit more inventing our own things rather than helping standard things, which is something I really like doing.
I recall someone at one point asking a question of whether or not, in the same way that, teachers are incentivized to publish because it plays into the conversation of whether or not, they get tenure, is participation within open source community, one of those factors that would actually contribute towards, your career as an academic, or is it still kind of like a niche thing specifically when you're dealing with people in computer science and physics and stuff?
I think it's better in physics in some areas. This place we still really do fall short. Academic papers still have a lot more weight than software contributions. I've moved into the sort of research software engineer / computational physics role. So that is something that's been fine for me, but I know some people who are still really pursuing a more academic side of things. It can be hard to spend your time on a software project when you're not going to get much from that. Whereas if you have a paper, that's a paper and that's something you put down. So there's been a lot of work in that, but I think it's somewhere we still fall short.
Right.
I mean, I'm always impressed by academics who can somehow manage to make that career work with mostly a software focus, because that was definitely not my experience. Like I was as a graduate student, I was essentially in a position where the thing that I actually wanted to spend most of my time doing was not rewarded at all. And now as a professional, like people pay me a great deal of money for it. So it does seem like, academia is just not the way to go. But I don't know. You have had a completely different experience.
Wow. So yeah, Anna. So yeah, definitely you've given us a lot of wisdom so far about academia and open source specifically. So yeah, what could you share with us regarding this topic?
I mean, look, I wasn't allowed to do it as a software engineering project either. My advisor was, when I brought the grant to him, he was like, "Yeah, this isn't a dissertation. This is code." He was like, "But if you add in topology and category theory and symmetric groups and a bunch of math textbooks, then it's a research project." So it's not really. I mean, even I think the person to ask how the hell he manages it is Ryan Abernathy from Pangeo. That's I think the only academic I've seen like maybe Leia also, but like but even then they're mostly doing it as a community thing because this was in the keynote, right? Like you have to spin it. You have to. It's funny because in some ways, the CCI grant was the reverse of the standard grant process in that we backdoored theory into a grant that promised code, where it's usually. But yeah, I think you're right though. Like the actual incentives in academia aren't to write code. They're not to write good code. They are to write whatever proof of concept you need to show that the paper isn't a complete train wreck.
Gotcha. So, Padraig, I see you shaking your head. This is probably something you could add here.
Yeah, I've also had some very similar experiences along those lines. I had the privilege of being in a lab that dealt with high-performance computing, and a lot of the most important work the lab did was the part of the work that was the least appreciated by external folks. So in particular, there are a couple of folks in the lab that literally spent almost 2 years figuring out how to get us reliable measurements on the computing clusters that we had, on the problems that we were solving. Because if you claim that you sped something up by 5%, I probably don't have to explain to people here with the statistics background how many measurements you actually need to take to claim that with any sort of confidence. But a lot of computer science papers just sort of gloss over that. They say, we measured it 3 times, it was faster, what's the problem? And nobody really, seems to really pay attention to the replication of the work, to, the incentives that this sets up, like Hannah was saying about whether, this is maintainable code, whether it's correct code, whether it, actually does the same thing but faster, whether this would actually be advancing the state of the art. And that's actually one of the big reasons why I ended up leaving academia. It's kind of disheartening to see a lot of the work that you personally most value not being equally valued by the rest of the community, and instead, everything being a citation fight, and you didn't cite my paper, so I'm not going to let yours in, review or two kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Amen.
So I really don't know what the answer is here, but I don't feel like we've got all of this worked out. It feels like there's a big opportunity for improvement. I don't have concrete ideas on how to fix it, but it sure seems like some smarter people than me need to figure.
I mean, the way
out.
that I look at it is that the exodus of physicsy PhDs into the world of open source is essentially like academia's gift to the world of software and computing in general. It's all kind of worked out.
And again, my company has benefited greatly from this. We have a ton of people who are from a physics background doing some really, really cool machine learning, and who maybe would have stayed, doing high energy physics or quantum computing otherwise if, academia had been organized a little bit differently.
This is very surprising to me because, our keynote speaker, to some extent, was an academic. I feel like a lot of the people that start these open source projects come from an academic background. And I don't know if it's the case that there is such a, well, actually, no, academic institutions tend to be very hierarchical, and so the degrees that you're away from people that make the decisions, or at least the people that influence the culture and the incentives, especially if you're a person who's just if you're just a student, you're pretty far away from what's it called? Who's the head of the university? Chancellor? I'm not sure. So yeah,
or provost or something.
Yeah, exactly. So whereas in an organization where it's relatively flat, it's easy for the CEO to understand what you're trying to explain as a developer, and it's easy for them to see the incentives of what you're doing. And also there's legit competition in the market, in which case if your stuff is no good, you're just going to go out of business. So that's also an incentive which we don't quite have in academia. But okay, cool. So I guess, does anyone else want to add anything to that? Because we're gonna move on, I think, to our final, and what's the final, one of the I guess the biggest topic that the audience would like to hear about, which is we want to learn more about. So a lot of these folks are here because they're interested in contributing to open source. They're interested in actually getting involved in your projects, and now we're going to give you the panelists the chance to give us an idea of what your community is like, give us an idea of what the process would be like for someone to come in, contribute, and over time become a core person. Because it's one of those things that's not really that a lot of projects don't lay out, because it's really difficult to lay out, especially on paper. Because one, you're kind of bound to it, and second, yeah, you're bound to it. So oftentimes, they'll just leave it very opaque and very murky. But be given this opportunity to kind of reach out directly to people, definitely tell us more about your project, your community, what the experience would be like for a new person to come contribute and eventually become part of that core team. And we can start with Anna. You want to go first?
How to join the Matplotlib community?
Yeah, so what's it like? Well, firstly, tell us about the Matplotlib community, what makes it special, and how would someone from out of nowhere come in, start making contributions, and what would their expectations be as far as at some point becoming part of the core team?
Okay, so you see my deer in headlights look. That's because I'm overwhelmed by the Maplet community. So if I'm overwhelmed, like, it's fine if you are. We get it. So at the moment, we are actually, yeah, all of us, like, we are trying for multiple modalities of contributions. And the thing that's been somewhat surprising to me, but I absolutely love, is some of our contributors, who I thought would have been the most like code first, have been super like on board, encouraging. They sprung up, built the new site so that new users can have all these new different ways to contribute, and have like been really really involved and really pushing like all contributions are good. And so the reason I'm saying this is because, like I said, we're trying for this multiple modalities. If you see a bug in our code and you want to fix it, start there. If our docs are a mess, start there. If you use Matplotlib in a really interesting way, or wrote a third-party library, give us a blog post, right? Let us communicate to the world. A goal with my blog post, with the blogs, is we have a ton of users, and they're like, can you please give us examples that are more real world, that are more applied, that show the data processing steps, that are like how I would use them in my real life. And those can't go in the Matplotlib docs because of our doc build system, and they take memory, and you have to do the renderings and whatever. Like, their maintenance is nightmare. So we have a blog. It just needs more examples. So if you want to contribute those kind of docs, please contribute there, because again, so those are the, and we have our new third-party package page, and if you've written something that's a Matplotlib extension, downstream library, tool, whatever, please post it there. I'm always looking for people to help be social media managers, and like we've got an Instagram, a TikTok, and Twitter, and my usual way for that is like kind of show me your social media profile, like interact with us. You know, if you don't seem like you'll be a disaster, I'll give you the social media guide, read it. You'll probably get access on one of our accounts. So there's that. The discourse, right? Answering questions, getting involved, you know, like anytime you contribute labor, you're doing labor that someone else doesn't have to do. Okay, but circling back, right? Remember I said Matplotlib doc install code process is terrifying. We have like 14 pages of docs, 15 steps. We get it. We know our problem. So like Numpy, we stole this idea from them. We have an incubator channel. So if you want to contribute to Matplotlib and you're like, I cannot get this damn thing to build, and I don't know where to start, jump into our Gitter, ask to be added to our incubator channel, and that is where we know, and the expectation is we will help you through the process of doing your PRs, getting stuff in. Because we don't want you to run away because GitHub is being obnoxious. Okay, so I think that's there's another thing I want to mention, because this is what someone mentioned. If someone is being unfriendly, tell us. Tell me, tell Tom, tell Mine's another good one, Elliot. Like, really, whichever member of the community you feel a vibe with, tell them that someone else is being like, this interaction is going badly. And we will talk about it, discuss it. Someone will pull that person aside. I have seen the best behavior influences from changes from people who, when I started Matplotlib, I was like, I'm going to quit because of that person. And they are now some of my favorite people. But we cannot fix things we do not, like, we're used to these people. And we're used to them, we like them. So sometimes the way they interact, we just don't see it as well. So literally let us know, because I swear, as far as I know, everyone in the community really does not mean to be to cause harm.
Right. I guess somewhat in that same vein, like you can't fix what you're not aware of. I feel like I know Bouquet has done user surveys. Do you actually conduct user surveys, not just users, but also I guess you could say contributor surveys, to get an idea of all the people that have touched your code base in one way or the other? May that be people that actually submitted an issue or a pull request, get their feedback on what their interaction with the project was like, and what could or should be improved to make the interaction better for them or the next person?
We did as part of our season of docs, we did a formal user survey. We got some feedback. We've kind of started running it again. It takes time, it takes resources. So really, if somebody wants to do it, especially someone with like a background in qualitative research methods, please. I am so jealous, Melissa, that NUMPY has a partnership with the university. Like, not fair. Totally not fair. But yeah, so like, again, we've done some of them. They've been a little bit ad hoc. We'd love to someone to come in and do it vigorously. I've honestly been taking like Twitter as a qualitative research, like qualitative user feedback, because we get the people who hate us and the people who are doing great things. And yes, lots of Plotly versus Matplotlib, which is actually, like, all those blog posts are an interesting way to kind of, for me, like, it shows like shortfalls in our docs and like where our communication could be stepped up, because we can usually do the things. But like, if your users don't know about it, it's like tree forest, right?
Right. Cool. Yeah, thank you. That was very good input. And it seems like the one concrete thing I got, like, if you could describe a role that Matplotlib is hiring for, I mean, technically speaking, hiring a volunteer for it would be like a social media manager. And
I mean, I want to replace me. Yes.
And secondly, for like an installation guru to simplify that, those 15 steps down.
I don't know if we're like, I mean, it's funny, right? Because actually, if we get money,
I'm using the term hiring liberally. I mean, like any like brave soul who's like, all right, I can take this for the pandemic's forces us back to work. The office.
Actually, I think narrative docs are a place where, like, Tim has bravely stepped up and done that, but he's also our API head, and he is also our technical doc head, and like, little bit too many plates, right? But the problem is, right, is like, you can't just step up and be like, I'm going to lead these things, right? You have to start baby steps, and we have to trust you, because right, like my feeling, like with the social media stuff, is you are the public face of the project. So if you screw it up, but that being said, yeah, we are looking for people to. I find we're looking for people to kind of contribute in, social media, long form narratives, long form tutorials, blogs, new user tutorials for technical stuff like builds and like all that stuff.
Awesome. So I guess real quickly before I move on to Predrag, so these people are giving you these things. What are you giving them in return?
I don't know. Lead cred?
Exposure. Which at least, I mean, people badmouth exposure, but at least in my case, like, I've gotten some amazing freaking opportunities simply from like people finding me as like a top contributor to Jupyter on GitHub.
And I mean, I said don't go to grad school when you don't have a dissertation. I got my dissertation topic out of this.
I mean, you do get something out of it if you do it right, I guess. But
I mean, also, right, if you're on the more inexperienced side, you learn how to work on a global distributed team with very modern software methods.
Gotcha. So I guess the experience is what they get, and to some extent they get the exposure to the they get the GitHub history that they can show the next employer.
And the thing with the social media people and stuff is, if you want to go into developer relations or social media management or community management, which are all fields that I've heard actually pay money in industry, that's how you can start building up that portfolio and that experience.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you. So Predrag, I really hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
No worries, it's a tough one.
We actually had like a practice session before we started, and I think I failed. But yeah, so your project is relatively new, and you have full backing by your company to a large extent. And the nice thing about a new project is there's all kinds of opportunities for people to come in and make big, like, major impact. So can you tell us a bit about how you plan on developing your community and how you would go about onboarding someone who wanted to become a core contributor?
Yeah, I really like the point you raised earlier about, what do you expect to get from new contributors and what do you try to give back in return? I think the most valuable thing for such a new project is just to get people using it, honestly. Just hearing user stories, successes and failures is going to really inform its development, and that's something that I can't do myself because there are only so many projects that I maintain. And the tool works great for me, so from my perspective, it's feature complete and perfect and never needs another release. But I also am a firm believer in everyone, regardless of how similar or different their background might be, has something to contribute. And so if you're not sure, if you're interested in contributing, but you're not really sure how to help, feel free to just open an issue. Tell me what sort of stuff you're looking for. Tell me, how like serious you're looking of a commitment to have, right? Is this like a regular thing? Is this like a jump in and out? Do you want to own something? Do you want to just like fix a couple of good first issue type things that are marked on the issue tracker? And in return, I can promise to support you to the best of my abilities to be as good of a partner and co-developer as I possibly can be, and to mentor people as best I can. And I'm really hoping that this can be a bigger tool that the entirety of the community helps with and really benefits from, because like I mentioned earlier, I myself use a ton of libraries, and everyone really benefits if stuff is type hinted, not just because there are fewer bugs for all of us to chase down and lose our hair over, but also because if your library is type hinted and exports those type hints, then odds are that I'm not going to write bugs when I'm using that library, because I can type hint my code against your code, and hopefully we're going to have these static tools. So I would really hope that people find what I ended up building useful to the point that they feel like it's something they would recommend to other people, that they would be willing to onboard their friends, and especially people like Colin said that care about typing hundreds of times fewer than the thing that they're currently working on. I think that's the perfect user demographic, because the people that really cared about static typing, probably despite the lack of tooling, probably are already well on their way toward adopting it, if not have already adopted it.
Gotcha. You actually touched on something that it kind of like just kind of struck me in a different way. I've heard it before, but there is the idea of the person who's making the contribution giving a signal as to how involved they want to be isn't really something that I think projects capitalize on, right? So if someone's making a contribution, you have no idea whether or not like they're gunning to join the core team, or if they're just actually this is a hit and run contribution, or whatever. It would be great if there was a way like for people to kind of like self-tag themselves as, hey, I'm a serious contributor. It's kind of like I was thinking it's like on those dating apps, right? It's kind of like what are you looking for? Why are you contributing to us? Are you just here because you actually want to join the core team, or this is just a one-time thing? Because the idea is like if somebody is explicitly identify themselves as a serious like person, then it's a lot easier for you to invest in that person, right? Because again, like if it turns out they're lying, if they're not serious, that's unfortunate. But I would hope that the majority of people that actually go through the trouble of actually saying that they want to be a serious contributor are going to follow through with that. But yeah, right now there's really no way of doing that, right? I mean, besides asking on the PR, asking in the issue, how involved do you want to be with this project? You kind of have to wait and see. And the problem is, well, we have to, firstly, it's kind of like a catch-22. You have to wait and see, but at the same time, you can't make the major investments that would actually make them more likely to stay around. So it's unfortunate. It's not exactly a super complex change. It might just be the case that you have a bot on your project that just posts the survey saying, hey, thanks for making this PR. How serious are you about joining this team? Is this just a one-time thing? Because like I think that would be super helpful feedback, not just for the person, because I think for the person as well, because it's a way to be inclusive, because you're automatically asking the person, hey, do you want to actually join us, as opposed to them having to go out of their way and ask you. And also, you'll know ahead of time if you should invest more in that person or if you should just wait and see. But yeah, that's a pretty cool idea. I never heard someone phrase it like that before.
Yeah, and I think it's been very useful to me in the past for sort of similar reasons. A lot of really great contributions in some of the open source projects I maintain have come from people that, you know, I maybe would not have expected to contribute something like that. So, for example, we had someone who turned out to be a high school student fix something that was broken in our CI for one of our projects. We're essentially miscounting how like test coverage was done. And this person, you know, happened to come across our project, happened to notice we were doing it wrong, and just like parachuted in and fixed it. And so that just goes to show that you don't have to have a degree or, you know, like either in computer science or in anything really. All you have to do is, you know, have the interest to jump into a particular project. And if you tell us what you need, then we might be able to help. And in you know, in some circumstances, it might even be able to, you know, offer additional support, you know, say something like, hey, you seem to be contributing a lot to this project. Are you interested in an internship? Can we get you, you know, funding? Can we, you know, write a recommendation letter for you for college? Or, you know, do some of these things that, you know, for me as a person, they're not very expensive, right? It takes me maybe an afternoon to write someone a nice recommendation letter for college, but to that other person might be of great value and might really, you know, help them out in life. So I think it's really just helping us all find really good ways to you know, be valuable to each other and be, you know, encouraging and net positive as a community. Yeah. Because we're all in this together. You know, if our code is broken, like everything sucks.
Yeah, that was a genius idea actually. You just gave me the idea in the same way that like a lot of projects has this like how you can contribute list. There should be like a separate list which is like how you can benefit list. And it should have bullet points in there like, hey, we can give you a recommendation letter for whatever. We can, you know, tweet about you on Twitter. Because I think like, you know, it's not difficult to do. And I think it would go a long way because it just makes the communication a lot more transparent. And yeah, it just, again, I think communication is the key here. They have to understand. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that on that communication thing, one thing that we hadn't mentioned before, and maybe some of the speakers want to talk about, is modes of communication, because we're talking about GitHub, and Hannah mentioned Gitter before, and we mentioned Twitter, like social media. How does your project deal with communication? Do you have like a separate Slack channel? Do you have a separate Discord or a discourse? There are so many ways to engage with your users or your contributors, and how does that work for you? That's something that I just like to leave there.
Could you guys quickly weigh on that? We'll just give it like I guess a minute to tell us about the different communication channels that Matplotlib uses, and also Bertrag, if you want to touch in on that as well.
So actually, I have a question related to that for I guess everyone here. So Jupyter Lab does a weekly dev call. So like everyone sees everyone face to face to actually talk with like words instead of text. And is that a common practice? Do most of your guys' projects also do that?
Yeah, at NumPy we also have bi-weekly community calls, and in the alternating weeks we have triage calls. There's documentation team meetings, and there's also newcomers meeting where I just talk to people who want to know about the project.
And those meetings are live?
They're all on Zoom and all open for everyone to join.
Same for Jupyter Lab.
Gotcha. Is that pretty much the same for you, Anna? Oh, who was that? Someone was talking.
Someone's asking about Jupyter Lab. The Jupyter Lab calls. You guys have like a whole calendar of calls.
So it's well, there's Jupyter Lab and there's a zillion other Jupyter projects, and so there's a calendar for all of them. We all somehow have to. I'm not exactly sure why, but we all somehow have to fit into the same Zoom room. So calendar. Yeah. So I guess there's just sort of like different. At least you know, for the project that I work in, sort of different levels of communication. So there's, you know, GitHub, which is for sort of like formal communications about like specific technical things, maybe like official, you know, proposals and whatever. Then there's like stuff like Gitter, which is I guess a bit more ephemeral, but it's also like, you know, faster and easier to get a hold of someone. But neither is like really satisfactory, I guess, in terms of like communicating complex things or things where there's conflict. So the ideal is the in-person dev meeting, but I don't think anybody's held any of those for a while.
Are you familiar with
Hopefully next year in Austin or something.
Are you familiar with this GitHub discussions tool?
I'm not super impressed by it, but maybe I can be convinced.
Yeah, I'm actually not terribly familiar with it either. Has anyone else used it within their projects?
It seems pretty similar, just a regular GitHub thread.
Cool.
Yeah, it reminds me of Stack Overflow because you can rate stuff,
upvote, yeah.
which seems like a terrible idea, actually.
I think the one nice thing about the GitHub discussions is that it sort of prompts people to answer other people's questions, whereas issues tend to be a little bit more like, somebody from the project should answer this. One thing with PyBind 11, we really get swamped by users. So we have a Slack channel that we communicate on, and that's just private to the developers and anybody who really is interested in development. And then and we've done some Zoom calls just between the other maintainers. But then for public communication, we have a Gitter channel, and that's just almost entirely users. We've had a couple of maintainers who worked on it for a while, but just kind of got burnt out because there's just so many people coming with just basic C++ questions and things. In fact, one of the things that we probably need the most is somebody who can do that sort of thing without getting burned out to handle that. We haven't turned on GitHub discussions for PyBind 11 itself yet, just because we already have several channels, and we don't read our issues already. There's just too many of them come in. But the Gitter is great because other users are answering each other's questions, and that happens with several other areas. And issues, it just doesn't happen that as often. It's a lot less likely for somebody to come in, read an issue, and be like, oh, here's how you do it. And I think discussions might help a little bit with that, even though we obviously built it to look very much like issues.
Got it.
We haven't turned it on yet, though.
There is this off-topic question that Matt Davis just asked that I wanted to kind of see if we can touch on quickly, and then I want to keep going with Max, Henry, Niels, and Carlos to kind of like share with us, what the core team experience would be with someone. And Matt's question was, what happens to an OSS project when maintainers have kids, and how can the project keep those people involved? I guess if you're one way to answer that question is to perhaps give us an example of someone who was on your core team who ended up having kids, and what the experience was like for them. Were they able to actually stick with the project? Did they actually become more involved with the project? Or what kind of like assistance did you give them? How did the community take it?
Well, they vanished for like 6 months, and then 80% of them come back eventually.
I think parental leave is like what, 3 months or 6 months? That's like a lot of time to.
Well, I mean, even if the parental leave's only 3 months, I'm sure honestly, people I think should take vacations, just like peace out from their projects more often. I guess my bad thing is I don't always communicate when I'm doing that, but it's I think the best way for everyone to avoid burnout is just like when you're fed up with shit. Sorry, excuse me. When you're fed up, when you just need a break, like take a break.
I'm curious about the kids question, disaggregated by gender and region. Because like our maintainer who just had a kid is in Europe, in a country with a good parental leave, and like mentioned explicitly, like changes it out, we're going to change things. I don't know that we've had like a woman on the project who had a kid, like any time. Melissa, it's you?
Well, me. Yeah, I have a lot of things to say about that, but I'm burned out by the pandemic and having my kid home for a year and maybe a year and 3 months with no school, working full time, and my husband working full time as well. So yeah, that was not cool. But yes, I do think that's a big thing, and I do think that's a big part of the privilege of free time that we were discussing earlier. And that moms usually don't have that much free time to start with. And even if they do have free time, they maybe don't have the energy to engage in other people's discussions online.
Gotcha. So it's not necessarily the case that the projects aren't doing enough to keep those people involved. It's just, life. You have a limited number of hours, limited number of energy, or a limited amount of energy, and kids are
Yeah, but
I don't have kids, but we do have nieces and nephews.
But I do think
and
there's strategies for that. For example, I would like to see more projects having. I think this is a word that I learned from Hannah, and which is like scaffolding contributions and having smaller pieces of things that people can work on. Because if you don't have to spend 20 hours trying to understand a problem to send a PR, it's much easier for a more diverse group of people to contribute. But I'll leave the speakers to talk about that.
I mean, the other thing I'm thinking is also there have to be better like projects have like step out, step in, but I feel like I don't know that projects have a good way to be like I'm on hiatus, right? Because I think like I've had a lot of these experiences where like if you drop off a little bit, you just can't come back because like all of the politics have changed. Forget about the what.
This is a very super interesting thing.
That sounds horrifying.
Yeah, we're not gonna have time to touch that like here, but I think it's definitely one of those things that worth expanding on in the blog post. So I'm on hiatus. I'm going to quote you on that. Oh, yeah, I can just come back in the video if you know. So yeah, so moving on to Max.
Actually, I want to ask Hannah about that scaffold. Are you talking about like a PR where like you do the first couple of contributions, then you expect somebody else to do the rest? Because that's actually something I wish more people would do.
That was an idea that I think one of the other big open source projects was that is how they structure that's what they mean by a good first issue. Like there's a whole concept with the good first issue, so you basically
not just like here's the issue written out in English. Yeah. Go jump into deep end. Good luck.
Yeah,
so it's like a team of people working on a single issue. Maybe
I mean, it's basic. Yeah, or like a pair program first issue. But the other thing I'm thinking about, right, the concept of scaffolding, right, in education is you start with something simple, you build up something harder and harder and harder, right? And the thing with that is you basically, because I think sometimes these PRs, they like feel like, oh, I'm going to have spent, like Melissa was saying, 20 hours on this, and I don't have 20 hours. But if I can break it down into scaffolded chunks of 3 or 4 hours each, that I, as a contributor, know that I can take a month doing without someone like coming in and doing half of it, then I will be willing to commit my time over the month that I have, right? Because I think that's the other thing and this I think intersects with the academic stuff, right? Of knowing that you're not wasting your time. Like if you don't have that much free time, knowing you're not going to be wasting your time is really important.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, yeah. I think this is a great topic, and I'm definitely going to see if I can open up a thread on this on Slack or somewhere. So Max, I am vaguely familiar with Jupyter, the governance part of Jupyter anyways. It is, as advertised, the biggest on the planet or in the solar system. So I guess the question for someone who's currently on the outside, interested in getting involved in the Jupyter core team, what would that experience be like? What can they expect?
Are you a front-end guy or a back-end guy?
Actually, I guess either, right? Or full stack, as they call them nowadays. So
Jupyter Lab would be a good place for you to land because it involves all that stuff. So basically, you kind of have maybe 3 options. So either you pick up something that's been marked as like a good first issue, and you just jump in and try it. I'm not going to take any credit for this, but essentially the I guess more senior people in the project are just very good about encouraging new contributions and new contributors, kind of shepherding people through that process and also sort of just like not being too picky, which is definitely something you run into a lot on GitHub. Like people will just tear mostly for like style issues or just like minor sort of anti-patterns. People will tear apart like new contributors PRs, and thankfully that seems to be like not something that the Jupyter project does.
So I guess the question is like,
sorry. There are three ways. So good first issue. There's a roadmap for Jupyter Lab 4.0 right now. So there's a bunch of like sort of more major issues that if you really wanted to get deeply involved, you could. We definitely need more people working on a bunch of those. Mm-hmm. And the third one is just come up with a good new idea or a good new feature that would be appropriate for core. Just something that increases basic utility, or like the last PR I merged. was sort of like the final nail. Like my whole career in Jupyter Lab started with this auto-closing bracket behavior, and then my most recent PR was one that turns it off everywhere forever, by default. So I'm glad, like, it took 2 years, but I eventually won that battle. So yeah, I mean, and then maybe like an looser. So a lot of effort has gone into making Jupyter Lab extensible. So there's like a very good extension system right now. So if you have a more experimental idea, you can start by just writing your own extension, publishing in your own repository. And then, if it makes sense, you can then propose, we have governance rules now, you can propose to like migrate it into core.
Gotcha. So yeah, that was great. So in the same vein, like, I guess the one thing that we learned earlier, it's a good idea to have the how you can contribute lists right next to how you can benefit lists. So you just listed a few how people can contribute, like how can they benefit from?
Well, we can I guess the most benefit we sort of formally give is like some ego stroking, but like having it be like a more formalized thing, I kind of like that idea. Like certainly stuff like letters of recommendation would be a good place to start with that.
I mean, I don't know, high school kids will definitely appreciate that. Well, I guess can you like? Well, I guess this is actually a real question, not a rhetorical one. Do you know of some ways that the project has kind of like given back to people who have actually made contributions? I mean, one thing is visibility. I
mean, it gave me employment, so I don't know. Or all of us, I guess.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
I guess that's mostly it. So
there's a long story behind that I could tell, but it would take like 15 minutes.
Next time then. All right, cool. So yeah, I think so we have Henry, Niels, and Carlos left. So Melissa, do you want to go ahead and you can actually just wrap up because I want to make sure you get a chance to actually talk as well. I've been talking.
So Hannah, just reminding. So there's a distinguished contributor acknowledgement. I think like 5 or 6 of those are given out every year at JupyterCon when we actually managed to hold it. So there's like a small monetary reward, and you get like if you participate in the Jupyter discourse, you get like a nice little title next to it that says, whatever your name is, distinguished contributor.
Is that like is that known to like is that published anywhere? Like, do people know about these kinds of things?
I'm sure there's a blog post about it someplace, but it's not on the front page of the project. I'm just gonna say Predrag is a genius because this whole idea of having like how you can contribute lists right next to the hype. I mean, we should advertise that. I don't know.
It's logic. It makes complete sense to me.
You just have to be. You can't be crass about it. You have to be classy.
Of course. So we have Henry, Niels, and Carlos left, and I'll just leave Melissa to kind of here like interview you guys because I feel like I've talked way too much.
Thank you, Sam. But I think it's just on the same vein. Like, what do you say? How do people approach your project? And what's up with how do you structure those contributions? And what do you expect to see when people offer to make contributions to your projects?
So with Pipeline 11, the one thing I think that helps is if you go and look at our roadmap and sort of see what we are trying to be working toward. And we're open to contributions, but we're all very much part-time on this. We all have to work on a variety of different other things as well. And in general, new features are probably not going to be something that will be that easy to get in. But if if you come in, so we had a contributor come in and really just start doing a lot of work on the clean tidy work. I'd added a clean tidy check, but I'd pretty much not turned on much of anything. And I literally wrote it in the PR saying, somebody should work on adding more checks. And somebody came in and just started doing it, PR after PR of turning on more checks, fixing various things. And pretty quickly decided this sounds like somebody who'd really like to have. So we got on a call with them, talked to them a bit, and said, yeah, they sound like you'd be a good contributor. So something like that works out well. If you just you're adding some big new feature, especially something you could easily add separately that's not part of, doesn't need to be part of Pipeline 11, then that's not likely to excite any of us that much. The communication has been a challenge. Like, we don't really read the issues just because we get too many of them opened. If somebody comes in and helps with those, that would be something like, you don't need to write code to contribute. If you help field issues, if you help engage with the Gitter, which is some of our contributors weren't. It wasn't necessarily that they'd written a tremendous amount of code. They just done such a great job of reviewing other people's code, answering other people's issues, and being part of the Gitter that they were an obvious choice there. So being part of that sort of triaging is just it's a huge help. So you don't even need to you don't have to be able to write code. And I think it's we tend to, when we're thinking about contributors and who we want to ask in, we think about people who we can who are writing good pull requests. But if someone's really helping, that's not the only way to help out. That's not even the most important way to help out in some cases.
But to add to that, I think there's a question of, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because we don't have a lot of time, but there's a whole thing about recognition if you don't do code, right? So the contributor also needs to feel empowered to feel like they are contributing something important if they're not writing code.
So they're doing quite a few projects. It's not this one, but I use the All Contributors tool, and that puts up a list of the contributors, and they don't have to be for code. You can say for bug reports or for issues, and you can add somebody and they get a little picture in the README to say that this person has helped, and I think it even sorts them by how much they've done. But that's been something that maybe don't keep up as much as possible, but in CLI 11 and a few places I do that, and I think it's been really nice.
So I guess Niels, Carlos, do you want to say something about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, for the Pandera project, it's still pretty small, so it'll just be me. You'll just be talking to me, and there are a few other contributors who do address questions and things like that. I mean, I generally have a very broad definition of contributor. Even if you go in and ask a question, I do use GitHub discussions, and I've found that's a little friendlier, I guess, just because it looks kind of like Stack Overflow, kind of looks like GitHub issues. So I've found that's a good avenue to get people chatting. I think eventually Discord or Gitter or something more synchronous would make sense. But yeah, for now, looking at the issues tab and good first issues are good ones. I got out of the habit of finding issues and docs and bugs and fixing it myself. Now I just kind of file the issue, and I hope that someone goes and picks it up if it's accessible enough. One trick that I've found, at least to grow Pandera, is to do like this spaghetti on the wall on the issues. I'll just come up with a lot of different ideas, and some of those ideas will get some thumbs up, and that's a big signal for what users and potential users would find interesting. And so that's generally like the way I've evolved the project. I get emails, and I respond to them almost immediately, and I do get feedback saying like, "Wow, this was a quick response." But I think that's a matter of scale. Like I think I can afford to do this with a project this small. But yeah, I went through the roadmap, and so if any of those things seem appealing to you, it's an interesting self-selection process. Do you like typing, and do you use data frames? And have you typed your function with just a regular pandas data frame, and you're like, well, it's a data frame. I don't know what's in it, but so I think it's been a fairly self-selecting group, and the pace of the growth of the community has been quite manageable so far.
I only want to say that I agree with Henry that triaging issues and helping with the different communication channels that the project has, it will be really, really valuable, a really valuable contribution, I think, for all maintainers, because being in the dual role of developing code, or perhaps not triple role of developing code, being a manager of the project, and also giving support sometimes is too much. So when people gives us a hand with triaging or helping Stack Overflow or things like that, I think most of us will say that we really, really appreciate that role. And that's a real contribution, even if it doesn't involve code. At least I would say it's a real and very important contribution.
Yeah, so I guess this brings us to the end of the discussion. I don't know if Sam has more to say or if any of the panelists have more to say on something.
No, I spoke too much. I'm good.
You did,
good.
Sam.
Thank you. Now this is a great panel.
No, you're
learned
mute.
A lot of great
no,
things.
yes.
Am I? Okay, great. So yeah, this was a really great panel. I certainly learned a lot, and there's a few things that I plan on following up on from the discussions. So you might hear from me again, just to get some feedback. But otherwise, yeah, thank you very much for everything. Yeah, you can close us on this.
Yeah, so thank you all so much, and I hope we got to all of your questions. If we didn't, please hang out at the Slack. I don't know if any of the panelists will be on GatherTown later, or if they'll be around for the sprints during the weekend. So if you have any other questions, please just reach out. And thank you. That's what I had. Thank you, all our panelists.
It was great talking with you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.